John, today we learn about the 5 hiring problems that are often seen in almost any company with every entrepreneur. And we learn that from a company that gives us lots of tips, a person with Chris, who gives us a lot of tips on how to defeat those 5 hiring problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris Mursau, he's the president of Topgrading, really gives us actionable pieces, Rich. This is one of the things you do very well. You ask for actionable pieces that entrepreneurs can implement today in their business. And this one's an important one because every poor hire you make can cost you at a minimum 1 times that person's salary. And I know entrepreneurs don't like wasting money or time, so you got to listen in closely on this one.
Yeah, this is packed full of value with a definition of what is an A player, how to influence, what are the aspects of an A player, what the cost is of turnover that's research-based, how do you define what high performance is in a role, and so much more. Here's Chris Mursau.
Today's episode is being brought to you by Financial Wing. Are your company's financials keeping you up at night? We all know that today's small to medium-sized businesses often overlook the fundamentals of accounting and financial operations. Our friends at Financial Wing can help with everything from bookkeeping, monthly closing and reporting, budget planning, and much, much more. Financial Wing's reliable and professional approach will quickly build your trust and turn your finances into an asset versus a liability. Go to financialwing.com/EU for your free 30-minute consultation and see what they can do for you.
Hey, Chris, welcome to the Entrepreneurs United podcast.
Hey, thanks, Rich. Thanks, John. It's great to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. You are the president of Topgrading. And I know we've had one conversation in the past, and I learned an awful lot about it, and many of our franchise owners have read the book. Can you give an overview of Topgrading and why it is so important that you've been there for almost 23 years now?
Yeah, so Rich, kind of in no particular order, starting with Topgrading. Topgrading at a high level helps entrepreneurs and really anyone who is responsible for making hiring decisions make more accurate hiring decisions. Yeah, I don't think this is revelational, but making hiring decisions could be the most challenging thing, or certainly is one of the most challenging things that we all do as managers. And what we've found in the 50 or so years we've been doing this, I haven't been doing it for 50 years, but Topgrading in a variety of forms has been around for 50 years. And certainly the process and methodology has. We've found really about 5 main hiring problems. And starting with the beginning of the process, and that is not knowing exactly who you're looking for. We've all seen a lot of job descriptions, and many of those job descriptions are not all that helpful. They're not all that descriptive. They don't define the performance and the results that we need very specifically. And we start off a bit behind the 8 ball, not knowing exactly who we're looking for. And if there are multiple people, which there often are, multiple people involved in finding and interviewing and assessing these candidates, we all have a little bit different view of what A player is in our head. And I'll talk about A players a little bit later. Then, how do we screen people? We usually use a resume or LinkedIn profile or some version of a resume or LinkedIn profile. And the reality is those resumes and LinkedIn profiles are candidate sales brochures. So it's their highlight reel. And so some of them are accurate and complete. Many of them are not accurate or complete. And some of them contain just blatant falsehoods that are really hard to determine when you read that resume. And so we're letting a variety of people into the top of the funnel. Then when we get them in the hiring process, we're interacting with people a half hour, 45 minutes, maybe an hour at a time for the most part. And the rhetorical question is, how well can you get to know someone in a half hour, 45 minutes, or an hour? Not very well, just not very well. And then at the end, we either do one of 2 things. One is we call the few references that the candidate provides us, who of course will all say great things, or We just don't do the references because who likes doing reference calls? So we don't know exactly who we're looking for. We screen people in based on their true or exaggerated highlight reel. And then we interact with them in a unstructured, oftentimes just seat of the pants, short way, and then we don't verify what we've heard. It's a surprise to me that we get hiring as often as we do, which is unfortunately not all that well. And top grading has solutions to all of those problems, starting with putting all of them together, a structured process. Yeah, think of the rest of the business. The rest of your business, you've got processes, SOPs, standard operating procedures, policies that everyone is required to follow. And so often in hiring, we just let managers do whatever they feel like doing when they're not experts in hiring or interviewing or screening resumes, on down the line. We're here to make hiring or help our clients make hiring a strategic business process so that we can really make talent a differentiator for them.
All right, I think I'm missing one. You said 5 hiring problems. I got knowing who to look for, screening people, not screening them well, short, inadequate conversations, not double checking the references. That's 4. Is there one I'm missing?
So, Rich, you're keeping me honest here. There is one, and I combined the polished nature of many resumes with how we screen. And so we use resumes for screening, but I'm going to broaden the resume, and that is we don't get reliable data from candidates. And adding the 5th is either we don't have screening tools to use, or we use screening tools that are inaccurate. So that sort of inaccurate, ineffective, and inefficient screening is the 5th problem.
Got it. So it's like bad data and then bad process to analyze the data, if you will.
Yes, correct.
Okay. And so I get that those are the 5 hiring problems that you see most often. Is there a starting place where you go, hey, 70, 80% of companies that I work with who are experiencing some form of these 5 problems, we almost always start here, and they all pretty much need to have this before we're even going to move on and working on how they top grade. What would that be? What's a starting place?
So a starting place is not to promote a product right off the bat, but fixing the screening. We did create a little software tool that does improve the efficiency and effectiveness of screening of the initial applicants, especially when you're placing job ads. For those of you who have placed job ads, you get a mixture of applicants. Some people who are qualified and many who are just not qualified, way too experienced, way too inexperienced. Your job is in Des Moines, Iowa, and they live in Denver and they have no intention of moving. However, in terms of inefficient screening, somebody has to read those resumes or at least glance at them. And our screening tool, it screens those out, gets people focused on those who have the highest probability of turning out to be high performers who fit the culture. It solves the problem of the unreliable data. And how it solves that is another component of our solution. So it contains another solution, and that is the top grading truth motivator. What is the top grading truth motivator? You can use this. Everyone can use this starting tomorrow for free, no software needed, but it is baked right into our software. And that is letting candidates know or letting applicants know early in the hiring process that at the appropriate time, which is right before a job offer, we're going to ask them to arrange reference calls with managers they've reported to recently. So managers you've reported to in the last 10 years, we're going to ask you to arrange for reference calls with them. And you may be thinking that could scare some people away. Good. And you're right, John. Exactly, John. And that's good, because what we have found consistently over the 50 years we've been using that top grading truth motivator is that people who have been consistent high performers and at least consistently solid core value fits for the places they've worked can get those calls arranged, and they're happy to do it. And so that shouldn't scare away those who are qualified and those who seem to fit and who have a track record of delivering results. And it really makes anyone who remains in the hiring process, whether they are an A player or not, motivates them to be more open and transparent along the way. And then we're letting candidates know we're going to ask them, then just follow through with that. At the end, right before the job offer, talk to them about who they've reported to recently and ask them to arrange those calls. So just follow through with that. Yeah, that thread of those reference checks, not really a thread, it's more of a promise, but follow through with that promise and ask them to do that, and you can verify. When you're thinking of the sort of the 80-20, I don't know if that is going to get, I don't think it's going to get quite 80% of the results the full top grading process will. However, with low effort, you can really, in a meaningful way, improve your hiring success rate.
Well, that's a great tip to get us going. Rich asked you for one thing that could be a really good way for entrepreneurs to really just take something, right, to implement. And I love that approach because people giving you references, everybody knows that's a joke. So even calling them is a complete waste of energy and time. Yep. But for you to, what I love is, okay, I see your resume here. You worked for ABC and XYZ. Who did you report to there? Oh, Jim. Okay. And who'd you report to there? Susie. Okay. Sounds good. And at the end of that first conversation, just to let you know, I'm going to be looking to speak to those two people. They're either going to run out of the building and be like, oh, crap, I'm being called on my bluff, or they're going to step up. And that's the other thing, too. I'm curious. I'm assuming that you're dealing with a lot of virtual interviews with your customers and people that you work with versus the traditional way of, hey, come on into the office. We're going to sit down eyeball to eyeball. Is that a factual statement? Do you feel like a lot of companies are now virtually interviewing?
So, John, more companies now are doing more interviews virtually.
Yeah.
And I kind of leave some space there because our strong recommendation is, unless that position is 100% virtual, meet someone in person, at least at some point before you offer them a job.
Yeah.
Now, screening interviews can absolutely be done virtually. We have a more in-depth interview for finalist candidates. That can be done virtually, as long as at some point there's some live in-person interaction.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been doing a lot of research on AI tools recently. I've just been going to school on them. And unfortunately, one of the best sources to find those tools is on TikTok. And so I'm scrolling through, I'm listening to some AI tools. And one of the AI tools they're promoting is the interview AI, where basically you could be on a Zoom with you, Chris. Mm-hmm. And on the side, it's actually listening to your script and giving me the answer I can just read back to you on my teleprompter.
I thought you were going to say, like, in like the interview, like the interview questions are being generated by AI. But no, this is the answers.
The answers. So I could be interviewing with you and you're asking me a question, but the voice recognition knows that you just asked me, what are my 3 biggest strengths? And it will tell me what my 3 biggest strengths are to revert back to you. Now, I think you can feed it your resume and you can feed it information so it helps you. But think about what's going on out there and how you can literally in real time hear the question and give the answer to the other person on the other side, right? To fake it, if you will. And all these different tools are coming out just crazy, and that's not the point of this conversation, but I just thought about it as you're just talking about this.
John, the times they are changing, because on the other side of the screen, we're working on ways that so AI can help interviewers be effective and potentially screen a little bit more effectively.
Yep. I mean, so AI is pretty much interviewing itself these days.
I mean, Rich, you take it to the logical conclusion, and it's just going to be 2 AI programs interviewing one another and answering each other, and then
robots interviewing robots. That's where we're going.
Exactly. Let me before we get to robots, I got usually keep this, Chris, for end of conversations, but I feel it's really important. It may lead us in a bunch of different directions. What is the minimum amount of time that a company should spend on hiring the average person for their business? Obviously, that could vary depending on the role and whatever, but what's the average amount of time that you believe, from your experience, is the proper time?
John, would you explain that just a little bit more? So is this, from the first contact with an applicant to job offer? What are we
Yeah.
talking about in terms of time?
Yeah, no, I forget about the onboarding and the training and everything else, but from generating the prospect to getting them to accept an offer, what's the amount of time a company should invest in research and conversations and diligence and calling their past three bosses and doing these assessments of the candidates, those kinds of things?
Yeah, it's good, excellent question. And so thinking about, and I'm thinking like about a candidate. So John, we're going to hire you.
Yep.
And so how much time do we spend with John? And how much time do we spend thinking about John's fit for this role before we offer him a job? John, let's say you're a candidate for certainly a management role and maybe even a leadership role in a smaller company, somewhere in the general vicinity of 10 hours.
Okay, perfect. What do you think the average company does versus what you think should be done? So if the 10 hours is the right amount of time to invest, what do you think the average company does?
3 hours or less.
That's what I would think too. I like that. Okay. So they're spending a third of the time that they should be on this candidate. Let me
Yes.
take it to the next level of question. What is the cost of a bad hire?
Depends at which level we're talking.
Let's
So
say,
what we found, and for those of you, and I won't go that specific. Cashier in a grocery store,
yep.
1 times their annual compensation.
Okay. So you hire somebody
We're talking when we did the research, $9.50 an hour.
Yep.
What they were earning, and whatever that is. You think like 30
About
hours per
18
week,
grand.
$9. Yeah, $18,000 every time a cashier was mishired. And this company would only keep cashiers who didn't turn out to be A players for about 6 weeks, because they found with their research, if you didn't develop into an A player cashier within a month, you weren't going to get there, because you were
Okay.
missing some of the foundational characteristics that they couldn't develop in the foreseeable future. And everyone, one quick aside, I used the term A player a few times
Yes.
already. Everyone, when we're talking about top grading, one of the tenets of top grading is setting the A player standard. And so our definition of A player, a high performer who exhibits your core values or fits your organization culture. I want to be really clear when I say A player. A players do not need to be promotable.
Yep.
Just fit for the role they're in or the role you're looking to put them in. Setting that A player standard for all of you CEOs who are listening, it is your responsibility to do that. If you have an HR team or HR person, they cannot uphold the A player standard. It's your responsibility. They'll do the heavy lifting, but they need to know they have your support when maybe some of your other direct reports try to hire non-A players. So that's what we mean by A player: high performer and a core value fit.
Okay. Love it. And Rich, maybe you'll dive in more into the A player piece. I think it's important. I want to stay on my line of questioning.
Please.
So if a cashier at a grocery store is 1 times earning, what is the manager?
So I'm gonna about 15 times.
Earnings?
15 times base salary.
Holy moly.
So
So
I did that research. I actually did that research in 06, I believe. So these are 06 numbers. Annual base salary of $100,000. Yeah, just again in 06 numbers, probably a little bit high for the store manager, but in the general vicinity. And the average cost of those $1.5 million. And average tenure, 1.5 years. So
oh my gosh.
18 months cost $1.5 million.
Okay. All right. So my next question behind this is, what is the ROI? What should the expected ROI be of these hires? And I guess I look at it this way, right? Let me give you an example. If I hire a sales rep for my organization and fully loaded, the cost is, I'm just going to pick number just for number's sake, $50,000.
Mhm.
That person needs to go sell. That creates revenue. Then I have to make margin from that revenue. I probably have to pay someone to produce it. We have expenses. They may have travel expenses. There may be a whole bunch of other things that are associated with it. Should I be looking to make 3 times that person's compensation in margin? Do you ever look at that? Like, what is the ROI for a particular role related to your business if you get the A player?
John, so that's going to vary, and really, it's going to vary based on the results you expect the person to deliver. As you were talking through that sales role, yeah, I don't have a good answer for what should the ROI be. It's a little easier for us to calculate the cost because with a sales
Sure.
rep, you would say we would consider this person a high performer if they deliver $250,000 of revenue in their first year. And so you hire someone to generate $250,000 of revenue. Let's say they fall short and they only deliver $125,000 of revenue. Yeah, the cost of the missed and wasted opportunity is $125,000. Yeah, because they missed their quota by 50%. And you could certainly break that down to margin. So if $250,000 of revenue is the expectation, how much is that in margin? Are we going to calculate the ROI on net profit? So you need to work it a bit. You work the numbers a bit. I don't have a quick answer though for you on that.
Gotcha. But there is an opposite side to the cost, right? Because you're hiring people because they're productive. You wouldn't hire someone for 50,000 if all they're doing is managing $10,000 of work. You're like, oh,
Yes.
that's not a very good investment. So there has to be some measure of return. I guess my point being, if you hire an A player, you're going to get a return. If you have a bad hire, it's going to be costly. So the delta between those two is massive. It's more than the one times earnings. It's more than it really calculates way above that. So I think it speaks more clearly to why you should be investing 10 hours versus 3 hours in this process.
Yes, John, and so often we hear, I don't have time, or we don't have time to get to know candidates more. So spending even 6 hours instead of 3. We've got work to do. And yeah, it's saying on the out of the other side of the mouth, but we are willing to risk wasting certainly dozens of hours and potentially multiple hundreds of hours if we get this hire wrong. Because that's another, and I'll talk about the cashier, the lost time in hiring a non-A player cashier who was eventually replaced for this client. The study we did was 24 hours. And so you start adding the cost of that, and it just adds up and adds up to really make the return on the investment of time meaningful.
Yep.
So I do want to come back and revisit the A player piece, and the definition resonates for me on high performer who exhibits core values.
Mhm.
And my assumption, but I'm checking in with you, but I'll offer my assumption first. My assumption is the way they're a high performer is they have been a high performer in the past in a very similar or like role. If they have not been a high performer in the past or a similar like role, you would have a hard time predicting they're a high performer. Therefore, they're not in the top grade.
So, Rich, and we need to be kind of a little bit more specific, I think, in terms of where we're talking. So, in the hiring process,
Yes.
thinking about the prediction piece.
Yes.
First thing we need to do
I
is
want to hire A players. I want to hire high performers. Basically, isn't the way I do that is behavioral interviewing to find out, were they a high performer in the past?
a quick answer, yes.
Okay.
Now
And
the question though is like,
if they were not a high performer in the past in a like role, does that immediately disqualify them from me saying they're an A player? Because
No.
I have no data that says, hey, they've been a high performer in a very like role. I have no data to back that up, so they're not an A player. Move along.
So you need to think about the role you're looking to fill. What is learnable and what is less learnable? What is easier to learn? What is more challenging to learn? So often, one of the key criteria as applicants are being screened is they have experience in our industry or a very near adjacent industry. When the reality is, learning what you do and how you do it could be the easiest thing to learn. We'll just go on the sales example for example. Is it easier to teach someone how to sell a car. If they've never sold a car before, easier to teach someone how to sell a car, or is it easier to teach someone how to have a strong work ethic, or be resourceful, or be friendly and able to connect with people? Those are the things that are really hard to teach and are very often, they begin being exhibited at an early age. And by saying we're going to teach someone to be friendly and work hard and be resourceful, saying we think we can give that person a personality transplant because they've sold some cars before.
Got it. So you're almost differentiating skill versus characteristics.
Correct.
And you're saying, hey, in your interview process and your screening process, you want to understand the characteristics of high performers for this role at your company. And you're interviewing really for characteristics, which are very difficult to teach or for people to even unlearn. Screen more for that than you are for skill, because you can teach somebody how to sell, but you can't teach them how to be approachable quite as easily.
Yeah. And I'll say screen for both. Like, I often get questions like, what's more important? Can they deliver results or core value fit?
Yes.
And I say yes.
Yeah.
Because it's both. It's not one or the other. It's both. Somebody who's a great core value fit, but who can't deliver results, it almost doesn't matter. And you've worked with people who deliver results, but are just unpleasant to be around for whatever reason. And that's obviously not good either. It drags down the performance of the entire team. Morale, other A players leave, just so many ramifications of that. And what I'm more suggesting is what you weight the most. Is it learning the content? Is that the gap, knowing the content? Or are there some fundamental behaviors or characteristics that are the gaps? Now, so we'll use sales. Yeah, the person hasn't sold cars before, but they have sold something else. So you can get a feel for their sales skills, and they exhibit the characteristics that point toward their being able to sell cars effectively. Yeah, we can teach them how to sell cars. Like those details, that's the easy thing to teach. The evidence that they can sell and they have the characteristics that we expect that really exhibit our core values. And one other thing, there's a track record of success. Yeah, what's the pattern? And that's where so many interviews fall short. In a typical interview, Rich, you mentioned behavioral interviewing, which is, can you tell me about a time when? Yeah, tell me about a time you closed a challenging sale. And I know we're going on with the sales example. Tell me about a time when you overcame a challenge recently. What are a couple of the biggest accomplishments you've had in recent years? And we end up with these sort of snapshots, a collection of stories with very little context around them, and certainly no patterns, because we just have one story in each area. Really challenging to predict what that person is going to be like when you only have one data point. And so I mentioned the 5 problems, and one of those being shallow interviews. A really important component to increasing the probability of getting the hiring decision right is at some point, which is usually just with your finalist candidates, doing an interview that is chronological, in-depth, and structured. So getting them to tell you the stories about certainly the recent jobs they've had, and for higher level roles, believe it or not, going even into their earlier jobs. So we can see a longer runway on those patterns. And we ask generally about high points and low points and people. What are some of the accomplishments you had? What are some of the low points or mistakes you made? And then really reinforcing that top grading truth motivator. Who was your manager? What were they like as a manager? How do you describe their style? And if we talk to them, or even when we talk to them, what do you think they'll tell us about your strengths, weaker points, and overall performance in that role? So that's it. That's another takeaway, everyone.
Yeah, that's excellent. So in an interview, go chronological, in depth, and structured, asking about high points, low points, and people. And on the people side, ask about the manager to get their take on the manager, see how they're talking about people and how they're led and their preferences and so forth. And then also ask, what would they say about you in terms of your high points and low points? And then the back end of that is later in the interview process, you're going to actually ask that manager, what would you say about the high points and low points, and see where there may or may not be any gaps there. Yeah, I think that's excellent. That is a great takeaway. When you and I talked originally, and this was off air a few weeks ago, I think I had asked what percentage of your company is around the selection process versus the development process. And I think you had said it was 85 or 90% on the selection side. I have a development question, wondering if you have a take on it, wondering if your company would consult on it, or do you refer people for these types of questions? An A player is a high performer who exhibits core values. As a high performer, they have high quality of task execution. If somebody is lower than you want, how do you influence quality of task execution? What do you recommend so we can move them up on that grid as a high performer? Do you have any take, or does the firm have any take on how do you influence better quality of task execution after you've seated someone in the role?
The first thing that is essential is clearly articulating the performance targets you have for them. What is the timing? Yeah. What are the quality, timing, and productivity or volume? So they know what they need to do, how well they need to do it, and how quickly they need to do it. That's important. Giving them feedback on performance against those goals regularly, certainly at least monthly, is important, and it could even be weekly in the early stages of their career or of their tenure. And if they are falling short in terms of just generally task execution, you need to figure out why. Is it because they don't have the capability? Is it because they don't have the sort of the motivation or the attitude or the want to? Or have you not provided them the correct training and tools they need to get those things done? So we need to know why. Like, first we need to be really clear on what effective task execution is. That's really important. The individual needs to be clear on what those expectations are. And then we need to figure out the reasons they are falling short.
Love it. I took notes on all that. And in the margin, what I wrote in the first part is expectations, which is clearly articulate the performance targets. The next thing I wrote was accountability. So accountability to meeting those expectations, feedback on how they're doing. And the other thing I wrote was coaching, which is if they're falling short, diagnose, is it skill or commitment, and work on the appropriate one to increase the performance. And then ultimately, obviously, if that's not working over and over again on a series of targets, that's probably not a right fit for the role. Okay, one more question on this piece, which is the other side of it, core values. So you've got somebody who is lower than you'd like to see them on core values. Is there a different methodology to approach influencing an increase in core values alignment?
So first off, the probability of dramatically improving someone's core value fit, if they're way off, relatively low. And if the potential to improve does exist, you should see that improvement happen relatively quickly after giving feedback. So now this, though, the feedback on the core values is a little more challenging, because we're talking about behaviors versus did you hit this number or not? Did you hit that deadline or not? And so really important when someone is falling short of core value expectations or exhibiting core values, note examples, come with specific examples. in this situation, someone, and I may not be getting the words correct right here, but the expectation in this situation was X. What you really did was Y, and then you talk about that differential. Why X is better than Y. On X is what someone who exhibits your core value would have done, and Y is what they actually would have done. So you need to be as specific as you can with very specific examples. That feedback needs to happen quickly as well. You cannot wait for 6 months, your semi-annual review, to say, all right, remember in January, you did this. Not quickly. And you're not going to, you don't have any chance of changing behavior when there's that much distance between. So again, though, it's really important to be able to articulate what exhibiting that core value looks like. And so some of our clients, and we've done this work with some of our clients, we have defined, maybe on a 5-point scale, the 5-point is a rating scale where 5 is excellent and 1 is poor. 3 is okay. What is that core value being exhibited poorly, okay, or excellently? Let's put it in words. What does that look like? So we can first off say, here's what we expect. For our customer service roles, core values, you need to be at least okay in the core values. And here's what that means. Here's what that looks like in your day-to-day role, because it's hard, like to say, hey, behave with integrity, or act like an owner. It's just, those have different meanings to different people.
Yep.
Let's be clear.
Yep. Chris, this is all great, and you sold me on the financial reason why entrepreneurs need to be really glued to listening to this. But I just don't have time. I'm too busy.
Mm-hmm.
What's the response to that? And not the response as to why I should have more time because it's important because of the financial. I already understand that. I just legitimately don't have time. How can I make time? How can I do things differently so that's not an excuse anymore in my company? How should I be looking at this so that I don't have that excuse anymore when the cashier leaves and I'm like, I just don't have time. I'm just going to take the next person who walks in the door.
Mm-hmm.
How do you handle that?
The short answer is find the time. Stay up later or get up earlier.
Okay.
Because if you invest that time to get the next hire right, and the next hire right, and the next hire right, eventually your turnover will slow down. So you don't have as many positions to fill. That's an important one. Question is, do you have high turnover? And if you do, that means you're having to fill those open positions way too often. Yep. So that will slow down. Also thinking about why are you so busy? And so often it's entrepreneurs. Why are you so busy, entrepreneur? It's because one, they might not have enough people on the team. Yep. And they may be trying to do too much on their own. And the advice there is figure a way to get the right people. Think, Who Not How. Great book by Dan Sullivan, if you haven't heard of it. Who Not How. Every entrepreneur should read it and internalize it because it will accelerate growth. And the other reason why entrepreneurs don't have time is because they have too many B and C players in roles. They don't have a team of all A players that are easy to manage, that get their tasks done without having to cajole them and berate or whatnot to get those things done. And so it's invest the time, because if you do it well, you will get that time back, often in multiples, when you get a team of A players.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'm hearing is you need to make it a priority, but there's other factors that are contributing to you not having the time.
Mm-hmm.
Losing employees. So if you lose 3 in a month and you got to spend 3 hours on each, that's 10 hours. But if you lose 1, you can spend 10 hours hiring the A player.
Yes.
As an example.
Yes.
So retention is big. Getting A players is big. so that they take on more and more responsibilities. They become entrepreneurs in the organization, start taking stuff away from your plate so you can spend more time hiring more A players, and starts cascading forward.
Mhm.
Where does succession planning come into this?
And connected with Rich's question about development earlier on, and actually, Rich, we're skewed a little bit more toward the development. It's probably closer to 75-25, because what
Okay.
we found is our methodology and the processes and tools to assess candidates for an open role are also really effective in assessing an incumbent team member for a promotion, or thinking about a controller. It's a little bit bigger, but a controller, you're thinking about whether they have the potential to rise to CFO at some point. We can assess the behaviors, and we know what the performance that will be expected is of that CFO. And so, couple quick hit. One, do it and be thoughtful about it. That's the first. That is the first step. Most, especially smaller companies, don't think about succession planning. Do talent reviews at least a couple times per year, and ideally quarterly. Sit down with each of your managers and talk through their team, answering 3 questions. Do you consider Rich a high performer? Is Rich a good core value fit? Does he fit our culture and exhibit our core values? And if you had to do it over again, knowing everything you know about Rich today, would you enthusiastically rehire him? If the answer to all 3 of those questions are yes, that person's probably an A player. Other end of the spectrum, obviously, if the 3 are no, then you have what we would describe as a C player, because we just use A, B, and C. And for yes, no's, then you need to have some discussion. It helps you get calibrated. And then for those who are yes, you do then talk about their potential. Do we think Rich is our next CFO or COO, or do you think he could go from engineer to engineering manager, or whatever it may be? Yep.
Thanks for that formula there. When you're looking at a role, and you broke things down just beautifully on taking the core values and having behavioral definitions for poor behavior in that core value, average and excellent. So I'm wondering, when you're looking at a role, what is the process that you use to go from a title and drill down into the behaviors which drive success for that role? What are the big categories that an entrepreneur needs to think through to go, okay, this title, here are the behaviors that we're looking to be exhibited?
So first step is to define success. When we're doing this with clients, we create a job scorecard. So that's our top grading term. At least I always start with, what results do you need this person to deliver to consider them a high performer? So that's first thing we define high performance. As we're talking through what high performance looks like and how we're going to measure it, the behaviors that will drive that performance are often, believe it or not, obvious. So it's a lot more challenging to think, all right, I need a vice president of marketing. What behavioral strengths does that vice president of marketing need to have? On office, creativity, and they're a good talker, a good communicator, and whatnot. And that very well may be true, but it's so superficial. We dig in and we define what that head of marketing needs to do. And believe it or not, very often to find at least the head of marketing, when they have a marketing department, need some relatively strong analytic skills. They need to be pretty well organized. Some things that you may not traditionally think about, but when we lay out the results that we expect, it will become more evident. Do we need someone who is more creative? Or do we need someone who is more analytic? Because those are very often balancing kind of competencies.
I want to recite this back to you for you to either validate or correct. Okay. So the formula that I just heard is, an entrepreneur should take a role, or call it a title. Start there. Next thing to write down would be define high performance in that role, or what that title does, which is high performance. That's number 2. Number 3, define how you measure that high performance. And then last one is number 4, which is what behaviors will drive those measurement keys.
Yes. I say, Rich, to make it to reduce the degree of difficulty on that, pick the behaviors that will drive the results. Find a list of competencies to use. Yeah, there are many of them. We have one company like one of our competitors, a Corn Ferry, big recruiter, but they also have interview product. Great list of competencies. That one works well. So you can just Google, but find a list that has 30 or 40 or 50 different behaviors on it. That will give some ideas.
That's great. You gave a number of things throughout the course of the conversation that I believe and I took notes on that are immediately actionable. Mm-hmm. So I want to check in with you as you look to wrap the conversation up. If you could speak to every entrepreneur who's listening and speak to them and be directive about what should they do over the course of the next week that is going to upgrade their ability to top grade, what would that be?
Use the top grading truth motivator. And that is just a quick reminder, telling applicants that they're going to need to schedule reference calls and then actually following through with those. So that's 2, doing reference calls with managers they've reported to, and getting some more honesty really and transparency throughout by letting them know upfront. That is something everyone can do tomorrow. The next thing is, before you begin looking for someone, be very clear on the results you need the right person in that role to deliver, and what those behaviors may be that would drive that performance. The performance is really important though at the early stages, because the performance you need to be delivered will give some indication on what experiences the person needs to be qualified. Yes, we're working this backwards. Very often we'll say, hey, we need a head of marketing, so therefore they need a marketing degree. We put a couple bullet points like that. I don't know, maybe that's true or maybe it's not. So let's though think about why we're hiring this person. We are hiring this person to deliver results. We're not delivering them to be a great member of the team. We need them to be that. But that is not the main reason we're hiring them. We're hiring them to deliver results, so let's start there. Get that right. And I've also found that is one of the most challenging things for most managers to do. So put some thought into that. Those 2 things will help your hiring. It'll help you make better hiring decisions. It'll help you screen better. What else can people do? I don't know if you can see it. Grab Foolproof Hiring from Amazon. You can get it on Kindle, you can get it on Audible. Outline some of those hiring problems and the solutions, goes a little bit deeper into the definition of A player, and does talk about the cost of hiring mistakes, or the cost of mishires as we call them. And of course we've got workshops and such that are attached to the book as well. So lots of help out there, but some things that everyone can do for free that take a little bit of time, but can have some pretty significant return on the investment.
Chris, if somebody loves what you're saying and they want to get in touch with you to learn more about how top grading can work for them and their company, how would you like them to contact you?
Best way for everyone to remember, just go to topgrading.com. That'll get you some more information. We've got an e-guide there you can download. And if you would literally like to talk to me, click on info@topgrading.com. It's on the website. Go to the bottom and say, can someone please connect me with Chris? I heard him on the podcast the other day, and I would love to chat a little bit more. And if I'm the right person to talk to, I absolutely will, and it probably will be. And if not, we'll get you connected with the right person on our team.
That's great. Thanks for being on today, Chris.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Please stick around for a few more minutes while Rich and I break down this episode.
John, it's interesting. His definition of an A player matches up to the conversation you and I were having off air just a day or two ago about our coaching grid, which is looking at quality of task execution and core values alignment. And I got to say, I was just tickled. That was what he described as an A player, somebody who's a high performer in their role, in their task execution, who exhibits core values, and very actionable answers that he had on how do you influence these aspects. The quality of task execution slightly different than how do you influence core values.
Yeah, certainly every entrepreneur knows the difference between an A player and a C player. But how many entrepreneurs recruit, train, ongoing people for that trait specifically and spend and invest the time needed to find the A players? And we talked a lot in this episode about exactly what you should be looking for. And I think that was really interesting. But then once you have them on board, it may be hard to change their core values if they don't fit. That's a very difficult one. So it's important to hire for that. But if they're not a top performer yet, what are you doing to help them? He even talked about competency and commitment. Where are they? Did you not train them enough? Give them enough competency? Are they not bought in enough? What do you need to do there? That situational leadership component, I know you and I are going to talk some more about on this podcast. But if you hire the right people to start with the right core values and either behavioral patterns of being a top performer, like you talked about, and or characteristics of what success looks like in that role, you're off to a good start. And way too many people don't get themselves off to a good start, and it's very costly.
I really liked his getting the behavioral definitions of the core values, and not just a behavioral definition of what good looks like, which we've heard that before on this podcast from other guests. But what's unique with what he suggested is, what does bad look like?
Yeah.
What is poor execution of a core value? What is average execution? What is excellent execution? You know, I know you look at a lot of companies for mergers and acquisitions. And do you find that most companies, first of all, have core values? And then those that have core values, do you find they have behavioral definitions of how their employees are to act out those core values? I'd imagine the answer is no, but I thought I'd check in with you, as you're in that world more than I am.
More than you may think.
Nice to hear.
Yeah, I know that all of our companies have core values and the behaviors that should go along with it. If you took the step further than that and said, okay, touche, they have core values and the behaviors. Now, are they measuring their people against the behaviors? And do they know specifically what bad, okay, and good is in those behaviors? And now you got me. Now I would say a very low percentage are looking at them. Now, there are these annual reviews. And I think a lot of annual reviews will take the core values and say, okay, rate this person on the core values. But really getting to the definition of not just what the behavior is for that core value, but what is not, what is the complete opposite, and measuring against it. And I love the other way that we talked about in this conversation with Chris about measuring people. Like, I'm even thinking about for this year, taking the roster of team members and having the managing supervisor of each person respond to the 3 questions.
Yes.
Do you consider Rich or John or Susie or Tracy or whatever to be a top performer? Question 1, yes or no. Are they a top performer? Yes or no. Number 2, do you consider them to be in alignment with the core values and behaviors of the core values that we expect? That's right. Yes or no. And would you enthusiastically, that wasn't a mistake, he didn't just throw that word in by mistake, would you enthusiastically hire them again? And that's a tricky one, because if you answer yes to top performer and you answer yes to core values, how can you answer no to the next one? But there could be reasons, I think. But chances are, if you have a no on the 3rd question, you're probably questioning maybe they aren't following the core values, or maybe so. I really love those 3 questions, and it's very telling. But there's a step further he took from that when I asked him about succession planning. If someone's a yes on all 3, the next question should be, what's this person's next evolution in this company? And maybe the evolution is nothing. Just keep them right where they are. They're perfect where they are. Just because they're a top performer doesn't mean they need to move on in the organization. But the answer might be different. The answer may be, you know what, this person's ready for more. And a lot of people who are technically ready for more are always a little upset that they're not asked to do more, which is ironic. But if you ask them, hey, look, we've evaluated, we see where you are, we want to help put you in succession for these other roles in the future, not today, but in the future. What a great honor for that person on your team to be like, you know what, I'm being valued here in this organization. There's a future here in this organization. I think it's a great way to look at it, and simple.
I love that too. And that what you recited was what he called a talent review. And I think you responded to that when you asked about succession planning. And it's making me wonder about the performance meeting or the annual review where an employer or supervisor and direct report get together to chat about over the course of the last year, what went well, what could have gone better, look at big themes. What you just brought up makes me think in that performance meeting, a great question to include in there might be, what talents and interests do you have that you would like to apply within the company, which are currently not invited to that table? And I bet we would find out, because you brought up there are people who they want to do more. They get upset when they're not asked to do more. And I think that's a great question to ask the people who we work with is, what more would you like to be involved with? What are your talents and interests where you'd like to apply them where you haven't been invited yet? Let's talk about those. It might be a blind spot, might be a miss on the employer's part to not include you.
I would agree if they answer yes to all three of these questions. If the managing supervisor answers yes to all three of these questions, the next question that managing supervisor should be thinking about is, look, if I'm going to be a leader and mentor, let's go back to Ted Mott, I'm going to be a mentor of this person. Shouldn't they know what that person's ambitions are and where they want to go? And shouldn't they be an advocate for that person and to help their career move along, even if it's not within their team of the organization? And I think that's where mentorship comes in, and training your leaders and supervisors to become more than just a manager, more than just a leader, but becoming a mentor and helping them go where they want to go. So I guess my response to that, Rich, is asking everybody this question before, if they're 3 yeses. I don't know if that's the way I would do it, but if they are 3 yeses, I think the question should be, okay, leader, manager, supervisor, mentor, whatever you want to call yourself, do you know what that person wants to do ultimately, and how we can help them evolve that role? And go find out, go advocate, go ask them what their personal interests are, and let's help them.
Yeah, where else can we expand their influence and responsibility as a high performer?
Mm-hmm.